morning, church. It is good to be with you. My name is Brewer, and I am part of the high school ministry here at North Coast Calvary Chapel. Today for our daily hope, we are in chapter 47 in the book of Jeremiah, which at first glance may not feel like the most hopeful or encouraging passage that we've gone through so far. But I hope by the end we see the faithfulness and the love of God for his people through this chapter. So Jeremiah is speaking to the Philistines in this chapter. The Philistines were basically an aggressive, warmongering people who were around during the time of the Israelites. And basically Israel and the Philistines were constantly at war with each other. The Philistines were constantly trying to take over the Israelites, to try and take them into captivity, all of these things. So these two parties were constantly at war with each other. So you can say that this group of people, the Philistines, they were not following God's ways. They were doing things, they were the world, if you will. They were living in the way of the world. So they went against God, they went against his people. And this is basically the retribution for those actions. But here's why this is encouraging, I believe. That even though Israel was unfaithful to the Lord time and time again, he still did his part and remained faithful to his people. So the beginning part of Jeremiah is God's judgment through Jeremiah on Israel, on his chosen people, because they made choices that went against God over and over and over again. And so they are now also getting to experience some of the consequences of those decisions, is the judgment of God. But we know that ultimately God was faithful to protect his people. So he's gone from holding his people accountable for their actions, because that's the God we serve. The God we serve will hold us accountable. And we'll get into this in a second, because that's, I believe, part of God's love, that God's judgment and holding us accountable is a really important piece of his love for us. So he went from holding his people accountable to protecting them and bringing to judgment all of those that went against them, and by that going against him. So that's where we're at now with the Philistines. And that's what we see in this chapter. There is so much destruction. It's not easy to read about. It's talked to like fathers running away from their kids. And it talks about a flood from the north coming in, and really talks about like the desolation of the Philistines. That's what we see in this chapter. That God is fulfilling his side of the deal, regardless of Israel's actions, regardless of whether or not they remained faithful to the covenant that was made. God has remained faithful to the covenant. And now he, despite Israel's actions, he is stepping in to protect his people from the Philistines. This destruction, it's harsh and it feels really hard, but it's honestly part of God's protection over his people. And I think this is an important reminder for us to remember today, that like whether we think it will or not, like judgment is part of this story. We will all stand before God at some point and answer for the way that we lived our lives, and answer for decisions that we made. And things like that, like the taking ownership of our actions and getting right with the Lord is such a crucial part of this faith story, but also ultimately knowing that God's grace is so much bigger and runs so much wider and deeper than we could even imagine, that he is faithful to his people regardless of who he is. And this brings me back to my point about feeling like judgment is part of God's love for us. God offers correction so that we can live into the high calling and abundant life that he's given us. It's like any parent with their kid, right? Hopefully you just don't let your kids just run amok and do whatever they want, because that could ultimately lead to their demise. That could lead to them being hurt. That could lead to bad things happening, right? And so in the same way, because God is a loving father, finds us where we're at, but he doesn't leave us that way, right? He calls us higher. He offers us abundant life in choosing him. And that, and as we live into that, we experience it. But even if we are not faithful to him, even if we go astray, even if there are moments where we don't choose God and we choose other things, his character is the same. He stays the same yesterday, today, and forever, and his character stays the same. So even if we are faithless, even in our moments of choosing our own way or giving into fear or feeling like we need to control things, or those are both mine, or anything else on the spectrum, even in the moments where we fall into those things and go back to the old way, go back to the worldly way, God remains faithful. So be encouraged today, church, that even if you feel like you're in a spot where I just want to help you get rid of any shame that you're holding on to. Yes, come to the Lord. turn back from your way and turn back to God. But also remember that he has always been faithful. He has always been faithful. He will always be faithful. So be encouraged and have hope that no matter where you're at right now, if you are on the mountaintop or if you are in the valley, not sure if you can get out or ashamed of your actions or whatever, that God has not left you, that God is faithful, and that God will always be faithful to his children. So be encouraged today that God sees you, that he is with you, that he is ready to step in with protection, and that he will hold up his end of the deal. It's not about behavior modification. It's about heart transformation. It's about looking at God. And as you look at God, you change because you don't want to be like anything else. So turn back, church. Turn back to God. Set your eyes on him. And you will be different. You will be transformed. You will be and know the light of the world. In 2 Timothy 2:13, it says, although I am faithless, he, God, remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself. And that, I believe, is our hope for this morning. Have a great day.